So you're saying that glyphosate gets stuck in collagen and in
Yeah.
fascia? That's and then the body goes and attacks itself.
I think that's why people are so sick today, because of our exposure to glyphosate. Yeah. I mean,
I
think
agree on glyphosate.
Yeah,
I agree on glyphosate. We had Stephanie Sneff on this podcast as well. And we talked about, the way I've always looked at glyphosate is that it drives those heavy metals into the brain tissue even deeper.
Yes. Dr. Mindy in the house. All right.
I appreciate that. The carnivore diet.
Because of what we eat.
Honestly, you've really touched my heart.
This is the way I look at every conversation that I have on my podcast, is there is a solution to that people need to hear for some problem that's affecting, so many people. And when I look at detox, I feel like detox is one of those things where it's starting to bubble up to the surface. People are starting to understand that we live in this ridiculously toxic time, but they don't really know what to do from there as far as what symptoms are toxic related, how they can naturally detox, and other things that toxins might be affecting. Like, I can't wait to talk to you about vagus nerve toxicity and other things that we're seeing that toxins are dramatically changing in our health.
Yes.
So let's start the conversation with, like, why are people so sick from toxins right now? And what can we do without spending a dime to open up our detox pathways?
Yeah. So, we are in this time, Mindy, of, we're not starting at zero anymore, right? We know that even before we're born, that we are born with this toxic bucket, if you will. And, modern life, unfortunately, we're in this grand experiment of, a combination of, things that I find are highly neurotoxic, carcinogenic. And it's not just like one thing. So there's a lot of information maybe about mercury or lead or arsenic, cadmium, glyphosate, you name it. And one of those alone, we could go through a whole mechanistic example of how they affect our physiology. But we don't live in isolation with one toxin, right? We live in the synergistic soup. And then in my perspective, we lay on, electrosmog and these electromagnetic fields that are increasing every year in our exposure. And that's also affecting our physiology. So we're painting the picture of, we're not starting from zero. We're starting basically from preconception, this toxic burden in the starting. And then we're in this ever growing, ever increasing toxic soup of synergistic chemicals that we're really in a grand experiment. So I think everybody can kind of understand that. And then, but the body's resilient, right? I know you and I both are very much believers in the body's inherent ability to heal. And I think that really, if we're on the planet today, we all really need to very much live a lifestyle of drainage and detoxification. We're only as healthy as our body is able to eliminate. And many labels that were labeled in conventional medicine or alternative medicine or functional medicine, that label, I do believe, stems from this toxic burden. And I think that if we all didn't have this, what we're up against and overwhelming our system, that our bodies would be, more resilient than they are. And how I frame this, though, too, is the body is resilient. And it is amazing that we are, even thriving, many of us in this toxic time, but many of us who have adopted these principles and understanding of how do we live. Like, it's not like a juice fast or a, once a week thing or once a month thing or once a year thing, which is great. I mean, I applaud any effort in this way, but it's like, how do you incorporate these every day? And I'm happy to share some really basic go-tos as we build on that.
Yeah. And I think what I just grasped from what you were saying, I never really thought to put it in these words, is that it's like exercise.
Oh, yeah.
Most people hopefully on this planet know that exercise is a health habit that they should be doing on a fairly regular basis. But what I'm hearing you say is detox and drainage and all the things we're about to dive into, there needs to be a protocol for your life on a daily basis that you are doing these things. Otherwise, toxins are building up, leading you to chronic disease. Is that that correct?
Perfectly stated. Absolutely. So,
yeah.
I'm a big Yeah, believe it or
So
not.
go into if I wanted to get fit exercise wise, I know I can hire a personal trainer, I can go to the gym, I could run. I mean, there's so many ways we can go about that. But when we look at a daily life of detox,
Mhm.
we've got celery juice, we've got fasting,
Yeah.
we've got, a lot of really cool things. But what would a daily life of detox look like in your book and drainage? Because I think that's important to put that in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first principles of detoxification, even in drainage, is, we want to avoid exposure as much as possible. So, really being highly educated on what can you feel empowered to do on a daily basis to make the healthiest choices as possible. And, we have to also, when I say that, I also think rigidity can be have a negative health
Agreed.
consequences. So,
Yep.
we take this, we just have to accept, we're on the planet, it's toxic, we all chose to be here right now, and we're going to do the best we can, and
Yep.
so with that premise, just really simple principles: clean food, clean air, clean water, do what you can within your home environment. We can dive into this now or later, but I also am a big believer in the power of sleep and having a healthy
Mm.
sleeping location to help just our bodies detoxify at night and have a really supportive hormones and your immune system and all of that. And so we can go through that checklist, but then how do we live this lifestyle? And so I'm like a nerd about water. So water is something that I'm really interested in, and we are we all need to drink water every day. And when we think about avoiding exposure, I think a lot of your listeners know that the water that we get out of the tap is not the healthiest. And so we need to filter it from fluoride and chlorine. And then there's all sorts of other, unfortunate chemicals and even pharmaceuticals and aluminum and all sorts of things that get into our water. So step one, get a water filter, and then you can go down the rabbit hole with water. So, but it's very important, I think, to remove those chemicals from the water. And then what we can do also, there's two things. We can structure the water. And the more I learn about structured water, I feel like this is a key principle to leading a lifestyle detoxification. Because the more I learn about exclusion zone water, the fourth phase of water, structured water, this is the form of water that's called H3O2. It's in a plasma state. And this is the water that really is in our body and in our cells. And it maintains electrical charge. So charge is really important for the health of our cell. So when we are sick, our cells can have a lower resting membrane potential, and so they can be harder to kind of communicate and stimulate an action potential and all of that. But when we have a healthy electrical charge, that's when the magic happens. Everything flows, things can communicate. So exclusion zone water in the cell actually helps to build that charge. And then exclusion zone water also, wherever we have exclusion zones, whether in the cell or on the cell membrane, in the interstitial fluid and the lymphatics and the blood, that creates movement and that creates flow. So when I think about leading a lifestyle detoxification, we need exclusion zone water that leads to more flow in the body. And really drainage and detoxification is like, how do we get things flowing? How do we get bile flowing? How do we get our bowels flowing? How do we get our kidneys flowing? How do we get our lymph flowing? And so I feel like the water that we drink is part of that. And we can buy fancy filters or fancy devices to structure our water, which I'm a believer in. And I think if you do have a chronic illness, that might be a step to really help you recover your health. But we know that exclusion zone water is also formed in the presence of especially two wavelengths of light. One is in the UV spectrum, another is in the infrared. So we all have access to the sun. And so actually even having your water solar charged, that actually has an impact. Or if you have an infrared light, or you can put the water in front of that, and that can help build exclusion zone in the water. There's also natural spring water because of the basically the movement and the flow of the water in that environment creates exclusion zone. So a lot of these devices that create exclusion zone water create movement in the water. So they're like the funnel devices. And then we know, I have Dr. Dr. Jerry Pollack is a friend, and he wrote the book Fourth Phase of Water. He lives in Seattle, where I live, and he studied like, okay, what are some substances that have high amounts of exclusion zone water? So as we ingest that, we can help increase that. So celery juice and green juices and cold pressed juices, we're actually squeezing the exclusion zone water out of the structure of the plant material, and so that's pretty amazing. And then
so that's why celery juice works. I mean, that has been like the most popular question that I have gotten. Well, not this year, but a couple of years ago, was like, celery juice. What do you think of celery juice? And can you explain, just so the listeners know, exclusion zone? Tell me a little bit what that means.
Yeah. So I'm using this word interchangeably and kind of on purpose. And so Jerry Pollack wrote the book, The Fourth Phase of Water. The fourth phase of water is actually also called structured water, exclusion zone water, crystalline water, and it's this water. Water is usually H2O. This is H3O2. And so it's basically water that forms, especially along the cell membrane and in these zones in the body, that actually has this different structure. It's more of a plasma state than this kind of flowing water state. And so it's more viscous and gel-like, and it has properties. And so when they study it, it's also in these patterns of these coherent crystalline structured water. So that's where the structured water comes. And then it has these different things that this water does versus H2O. So this water really works for us. It helps our electrical charge. It helps propel movement in the body. It actually excludes toxins out of that water, so that's so.
So if you can't afford a filter, a whole house filter, you could leave a pitcher of water out at sunset. Sunrise.
Any part of the sun, because we get that full spectrum, in the sun of UV and the infrared. You can drink celery juice, spices. So Jerry found in his lab turmeric, coconut oil. These things help to, there's so much research that can be done, but he just kind of dabbled and looked. And then, so we can do that. And then we can structure the water in our body. So we can ingest, and then we can actually structure the water. And that's why I think a lot of photobiomodulation and a lot of light therapy, and also the infrared saunas. So remember, when we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, it's the different wavelengths in light, and we have UV on one. So the sun emits that, and we can be in UV light, but you have to be careful not to get burned. But of course it's going to help structure the water. Infrared, you also get exposed, but a lot of devices, these days in the biohacking community really harness the power of infrared frequencies. And infrared has so many properties, and it kind of penetrates a little bit deeper into the cell and into the body. And then it also creates more exclusion zones. So I think not only are you getting that heating and sweating and, all the things that, we know that to do, especially in the infrared sauna, but I think a big part of why we see the health impacts is that we're increasing that H3O2 in our physiology.
So interesting. So then are you saying if I just drink water, I'm not getting hydrated?
I'm saying that in some ways, but Jerry does remind me that because of our biochemical reactions, we do give off infrared in our body. Our metabolic, our nature's brilliant, right? So we need this. So we internally produce thermal energy, right, in the body, and infrared in the body. And so we do, like the things that we ingest, we can transform into exclusion zone. But remember, modern life. So you fill the modern bucket with all of these unfortunate toxicants. They can disrupt the exclusion zones in the body. Jerry also recently did a study and put a Wi-Fi router in front of exclusion zones water, and it does disrupt it breaks it down. So the toxic bucket of, chemicals and neurotoxins and carcinogens, and then EMF, that really, we have like a lot, a lot in modern life is undoing our exclusion zone water, if that makes sense. And so we want to be most mindful of that, so we can just have a lifestyle that we're like, okay, what am I drinking today? What am I eating today? How am I moving? How am I, am I getting out in the sun? Can I be exposed to infrared technology? And these things will help us to build that, energy, which is, I think, a big key to our vitality.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Agreed. So again, what I'm hearing from you is water would be one of the very first things we would want to look at if we were creating a life of detox. Looking at water in sunlight, looking at celery juice, looking at I mean, we haven't even gone into EMFs, but it does seem like that would be a pretty simple step that people could take. And I don't think people think of water as a form of detox.
Yeah, I don't think people, I mean, I think people think like, okay, I got to drink water, but I don't think they take it to the next step. So
No.
like water, like we are mostly water, and so
Right.
water is such a key part of our physiology. And I don't know about you, Mindy, but a lot of my patients are chronically dehydrated. They have signs of dehydration. They also have things in their physiology because especially I deal like with a lot of chronic illness. So a lot of patients have low antidiuretic hormones. So they're always thirsty, they're peeing a lot. We're drinking things that dehydrate us, we're, running around and not making time for ourselves. So I spend a little time on that first piece because it's foundational, and it's
super foundational.
It's really, I think if you take one thing away from our talk today, I think that will only give you momentum in your health.
Okay. I love that. And again, like in the biohacking world, you can get down rabbit holes of thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And yet you can come back to some core principles. This is why I love fasting that are free. And sunlight. Those are biohacks as well. And that's what I heard you saying is that you can biohack your water. So you're getting more hydrated using the power of the sun. I love that. So, okay, what else? What's next? What if I want to create a life of detox?
Yeah. I want to bring to the forefront our lymphatic system. So our lymphatic system, I'm sure your listeners have heard about, but a lot of people still don't know about the lymphatic system, right? And I think it's one of the most important systems, especially when we think about detoxification, and still very much overlooked. Conventional medicine doesn't really talk about the lymphatics unless you unfortunately have a surgery and have edema or lymphedema or things like that. And so, but our lymphatic system is really like our lifeline in our body. And if it's okay with you, I'll just spend a moment to
please. We've touched on it a little bit, but you're going to bring a new set of information. So go for it.
Okay, great. So the lymphatic system is tied intimately to our circulatory system. So we have our heart pumps blood throughout our body. The oxygen-rich blood goes through our arteries. And then in the tissue space, there's something called a capillary bed. And that's where everything gets real small. And that basically oxygen-rich blood leaves the capillaries. And a lot of fluid leaves the capillaries at that time too. And much of it goes back to the venous system and then returns to the heart. But a lot of fluid stays in that space. And that space in between the cells and the tissues and where all the action is in the body, it becomes what we call interstitial fluid. So it's a space between the cells, and it's bringing oxygen and nutrition, and it's removing waste. And when you think about, we have two cells, it's, in this interstitial space, that fluid then drains into what we call lymphatic capillaries that are kind of in this space. And so a big, I know that you're really into cellular rejuvenation and cellular health. And a big part of keeping our cells healthy is that fluid, first of all, is moving, and we have enough of this fluid and energy and nutrition and oxygen brought to the space, but also that it's just as important that this is leaving that space so things are draining and that there is not a backup or buildup of fluid. And then that's where the trash isn't getting taken out. And when the trash piles up, the cells can't basically remove waste. And so it's a really important piece of how our physiology works. And I have a friend and a mentor, Dr. Rob Cass. He created a company called Physica, and he has this big book where he trains people. And he always says that when you do lymphatic therapies and when you drain the lymphatics, you're actually draining this interstitial space of the extracellular matrix. And because everything's interconnected, that you're actually having a huge impact on our epigenetic expression, because the DNA cannot be optimized and expressed if this fluid space isn't draining. And so the health of the cell is very much dependent on our lymphatic therapies. And so the lymph basically drains in the capillaries, and then it's this body-wide network of capillaries and vessels and nodes. And part of its job is to remove waste, but it's also to support our immune system. So whatever we're exposed to, whatever viruses or bacteria or parasites or mold or mycotoxins that gets into this fluid, engages in our lymph nodes or our lymphatic organs, and then our body has the opportunity to mount an immune response. So really two key pieces that many of my patients are challenged with are, a buildup of toxicity and immune dysfunction. And so these two things are so important to improve. And so that's why we focus on the lymphatics. And the freebie treatment of how to move your lymph is hydration is part of it, and then also movement, just moving your body.
Yeah.
Moving your body is going to be important. The lymphatics have a one-way valve system towards the heart, and so creating movement, just even if you're if you're not even if you're sick and you don't have a lot of energy, just do what you can. But there's also a lot of just different technologies you can invite into your home, like the rebounder and the vibration plates and the dry skin brushes and the gua shas and all of these things. But the more that you move, you basically move the lymph. And tying this all together with some of what I shared before, I have a good friend, Gina Bree, and she has a company or an organization called the Hydration Foundation, and she's really big on educating people on structured water. But she really taught me that our fascia, which is our connective tissue, is when we talk about connective tissue, it's often the fascia and the lymphatics. And this fascial system full of collagen actually is a way that we deliver the structured water in our bodies. So the fascia is actually designed to move water in the body. So you actually get hydrated by moving. So movement is key. Exercise is key. We got to get moving to move our lymph, to hydrate our cells, and to feel good, of course, as well.
So interesting on the fascia, because you start to see trends in your health the longer you live. Yeah. And when I was 20 years old, I had chronic fatigue syndrome, was diagnosed with high levels of Epstein-Barr virus. And it came after I had a fasciotomy. And I was a competitive tennis player, and I had compartment syndrome, and they went in and cut the fascia on my lower legs. I have 4 big scars on my legs. And, but then after that, it went into this immune deprived state that allowed Epstein-Barr to emerge. Do you feel like there's a connection? And then with those two situations, and then one other thought on that is, when you're talking about immune suppression, I mean, we're living in the time of immune suppression. Like, if there's anything COVID's taught us, it's not to be scared of a virus. It's that we should be powering up our own immune system. Do you think there's a connection between this lack of immune function and people not moving? I know it's multifaceted, but that's the first time I've heard that connection between fascia and immunity. So it made me fascinated.
I think it's all interconnected. In your story, I'm sorry you went through that. And there's definitely, I'm a big believer, everything is interconnected in the body, and nothing's random. And so, when you think about kind of, tying into your story and kind of the larger question, when we think about the fascia, the connective tissue, the lymphatics, this is a lot of where we have a lot of our immune system surveying, our bodies. A lot of mast cells hang out in the connective tissue and in the, this space. And I don't know about you, but I have a lot of patients who have this increased sensitivity and increased histamine issue. And it's because the mast cell is so bombarded by, what it's exposed to. And so the threshold lowers and lowers and becomes more hyper excitable and releases histamine, and so that's, part of it. We have other immune cells, surveying this area, as well. And, there are these, there are these pictures in textbooks of the extracellular matrix, and that's it's all interconnected. So we start in that visual, and it's this highway. We have what we thought, when I was in school, we thought the fascia was just structural, right? We just thought it was the saran wrap around the muscle, whatever. But the more we learned about it, it's not only, structural, but it actually is a communication network in the body, and it is a fiber optic, essentially conductor of electrons, protons, biophotons. It's also surrounded again by the structured water. This is where glyphosate, when we talk about detox, glyphosate is a glycine analog. One of the key amino acids in collagen is glycine. So unfortunately, one of my friends, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, she talks about how glycine gets interrupted, or glyphosate gets interrupted in the space that glycine gets is supposed to get. And so then we have this, this really toxic collagen that's disrupting our network and then creating our immune systems like, what's that? And so I actually had a patient with scleroderma, and I put her in the flow presso and then measured her urine for glyphosate, and it was like the highest glyphosate I've ever seen. And so again, this is like a N of one in my office kind of putting it together, but it's like this autoimmune phenomenon that's happening. Is that an autoimmune phenomenon, or is the body just like, hey, that's not me, that's glyphosate and where glycine should be, and there's an inflammatory process. So I know I gave you a couple angles to think about the immune system and our connective tissue right there, but I think we can't think of one without the other. It's all happening in this space.
So you're saying that glyphosate gets stuck in collagen and in fascia? That's crazy. And then the body goes and attacks itself.
I think that's why people are so sick today, because of our exposure to glyphosate. Yeah. I mean, I agree on
glyphosate. Yeah, I agree on glyphosate. We had Stephanie Seneff on this podcast as well. And we talked about, the way I've always looked at glyphosate is that it drives those heavy metals into the brain tissue even deeper. But now you have me thinking a little bit even expanded beyond that it's stuck in fascia, which is in our whole body and is in joints. And so if you create an autoimmune reaction to that, if your body's attacking your joints.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's it's so sinister, right? Glyphosate gets it affects so many systems in the body, and drives aluminum in the brain, and all of that, which is really important to be aware of. But I think when I think about why it's so insidious, I think it affects membranes in the body, so leaky gut, leaky brain, but also I think that the future, of a lot of where our learning is in the fascia, and how the fascia is this communication network, and we can see it. I don't know if you've had your scars injected or if you've seen that piece before, but we see that sometimes scar tissue can create these electrical disturbances in the body and all these different things. But you can do an injection on your shin and your shoulder can start moving again. So we know there are these distant connections, but it's all interconnected. And then in the world of body work, people can really understand the presence of manipulating fascia and moving fascia and creating more movement and a flow and opening, that it just has this huge body-wide effect on the body. So I think, I think it's glyphosate disrupts so many things, but the fascia I think is something to noodle on for you just to digest, because I think it will.
Kelly and I go way back on fascia, because the first time I got on the flow presso, she did a fascial release and I got off and I was raging with anger.
Yes.
And I was like, and I'm not an angry person. It just totally shocked me. So it was the first time that I really saw what the emotional piece of fascia could be. And when I went back and I actually looked at it, I realized that I think the anger, a lot of it was the situation where the scar actually happened and the time period of that. So ultimately it was a gift, and Kelly and I joked about it. And then I got on a plane and flew to Pennsylvania to have her all fix me all up. So
they call it fascial memory. There are people who are studying this and calling it fascial memory, like our tissues through the structured water in the fascia hold memory. That's where they're thinking. That's where scar injections, body work, the flow presso, and that's why, it's important to do all the things that you need to do to heal and address your emotions. But if you're stuck out there and if you're not seeing the movement in your health, you could have, stuck energy, emotions, trauma in your tissues that literally is blocking your body's ability to self-regulate, heal, detoxify, and all of it.
Crazy. It's crazy. Talk a little bit, because I definitely want to get hit on this topic. This idea behind vagus nerve toxicity. And I think what's really interesting and what I'm seeing in the detox world is that we've gone from detox being just eat better to, juice cleanses. And now we're sort of moving into detox as it's not as simple as just mobilizing toxins. We have got to have things like flow presso, like the movement in general, water. I mean, everything you're talking about. But what is it that is damaging the vagus nerve? So what I'm thinking is it affecting our ability to go, toxins are affecting our ability to go in and out of parasympathetic and sympathetic. Is that what vagus nerve toxicity is?
Yeah, I'm a naturopath, so we're always trained like, okay, what's the root cause, like, and I think it's really great awareness around vagus nerve. And, people are like, okay, the vagus nerve needs to be, supported, do these exercises, that person's stuck in fight or flight. And, that's all really great information. But, I take it kind of in a lens deeper and being like, okay, well, why did the vagus nerve become imbalanced and begin with? And we know like emotions and trauma can affect that, but there can also be, this, known what we call vagus nerve infection and vagus nerve toxicity. And so whenever we think about a toxicant, we think about its, how does it disrupt our physiology? And many toxicants, especially heavy metals and certain biotoxins also from different infections, can be neurotoxic. So they can have a propensity to their fat loading, so they can get settled into fat. And our neurons and our nerves are made up of fat and phospholipids and all of these all of this lipophilic material. And so when these toxicants get lodged in parts of our nervous system, they disrupt the flow of communication. And then that can be part of why the vagus nerve is not communicating well. It's not producing enough acetylcholine, or there's, dysregulation. And whenever we think about supporting the vagus nerve, I kind of have my checklist. I think, okay, do a dental history, make sure that there's no silver filling still or amalgam filling still in the mouth. There's actually no root canals. Those can be dead teeth, that also those biotoxins can affect the vagus nerve. We also look at the jaw and see if there's any cavitations. The cavitations can be necrotic bone that can also be producing biotoxins and affecting the vagus nerve. So we think about like, okay, nothing, because I remember the vagus nerve comes out from the brainstem and then there are branches in the neck. And so the mouth, because of the proximity, can be very much tied, to like where the source is. So we think about that. And then we think about the lymphatics. And so, a big highway in the neck, the neck is a big highway. We have like blood going into the brain, blood going out of the brain. We've got the vagus nerve. And then we have these groups of lymph nodes called the cervical lymph nodes. And they are often, if you've had, a lifetime of, dental toxicity, that drains into them. If you have, again, any dental infection, that drains there. Even sinus infections can kind of drain into the cervical lymph nodes. Also, if you're struggling with a chronic virus or Lyme and co-infections, that can, keep these lymph nodes chronically kind of like swollen or inflamed or congested. And again, because of the proximity of these lymph nodes, so just think if you have lymph nodes that are congested with pathogens and toxicants, that can actually migrate and be a reservoir, and those things can settle into the vagus nerve. And so we think about, cleaning up the mouth and really opening up drainage pathways, in the neck. Also, all the systemic support to support the immune system. But, my work there and what I've seen too, Mindy, is the more that we get to that root cause of what's like slowly poisoning the vagus nerve, right? So get that addressed. And then we do a lot of the, vagus nerve exercises and support, but a lot of how we recover the vagus nerve is really opening up the lymphatic channel, opening up the lymph in the neck, and then, things get moving and the immune system can support the vagus nerve more, and then toxins can clear out. I use a lot of phosphatidylcholine. I also
Mm.
use, there's a woman, Diana Driscoll, who's taught me a lot. She has a clinic called Potts Care, and she created a product called Paracin Plus, which helps with acetylcholine. So the communication in the vagus nerve, so if you have a vagus nerve that's inflamed and cranky and toxic and infected, it's not producing enough
Yeah.
neurotransmitters. So that can be really supportive. And then we have all sorts of topicals that we do and techniques. But yeah.
What would you know if you had vagus nerve toxicity?
It's a good question. Many of my patients have symptoms that we can ascribe to the vagus nerve. So in my world, there's a lot of POTS, which is when you stand up, your heart goes too fast. There's dysautonomia. There's just not the ability really not to kind of be in a balanced state between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system, or even frozen, like with that fight, flight, or freeze kind of, stuck, you're kind of stuck in one gear, or you can't get into parasympathetic. The vagus nerve innervates the heart, so some people could have a fast heart rate or speeds, any, lung issues, a lot of digestion. So a lot of digestive issues. I also, not only think of upstream in these big branches here, but a lot of the highway of the vagus nerve, the communication from the brain to the body, but a lot of it is really body to brain. So if there's a lot of gut dysbiosis and a lot of biotoxins in the gut, that can travel to via the vagus nerve and perpetuate kind of this dysfunctional pattern. So it's layered, and
it's complicated.
It's layered,
Yeah.
and, there's, it's the biggest cranial nerve, and it really touches like every kind of body system that if a patient walks in our office has, an imbalance in. So I often assume, that this is something to tackle. But again, I go through that checklist.
Yeah. And so what can we do? Are there some things that we can do that on our own to help with our vagus nerve toxicity?
Yeah.
What are some of the easiest things to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm, again, thinking about, what could be at the source and at the root. And again, if you're pretty sick out there, I'd encourage you to work with a provider who could help you kind of unlayer that so that you have, all the tools and can do that safely. I use a lot of different topical treatments in my office. And, my friend, Dr. Ruggiero, formulated a cream for me that's called Lymph Flow, and it has a probiotic in it that produces a peptide called macrophage activating factor. And where we apply the cream, we actually really open up the lymph. And so macrophage activating factor also is an antiviral and an immune support. So we're kind of getting that through the skin. We're getting that, absorption that through the dermis, the interstitium, that we can actually affect the lymphatics and, eventually get to the nerve to help heal the nerve. So we've seen that. So anything that you can really do to open up this pathway has a positive effect. And, you can sing and gargle and, do all those other exercises too.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, Dr. Karazian talks a lot about that. And then there's, Dr. Stephen Porges, he has, the polyvagal theory. He has a couple of pieces of equipment. We have friends at a company called Brain Harmony where you can rent his equipment, and he has different like vibration techniques that you can do to actually help to improve communication in the vagus nerve. So there's a lot of emerging kind of technologies too to help to rehabilitate the nerve as well.
Yeah. Before I left Kelly's clinic, she was rubbing all kinds of things on me. She's like, "Oh, you're getting on a flight." And she like pulled out all these jars and she started rubbing this stuff on me. I'm like, "Oh, my people. I found my people when they're like care about my health when I get on a plane." But she put on Sophia Flow. Is that one of your products as well?
Yeah. So that was the first edition. And then we kind of evolved it, Marco and I, and it's called Lymph Flow now, and it has a couple more probiotics. Yeah. So
love that.
Yeah, so that really helps to, open things up. And we've had a lot of, really wonderful clinical anecdotes over the years with that.
Oh, well, we're going to have to try it. I love that. Okay. Talk about the other thing that I saw you talk about. And I love this because you and I definitely meet on the body heals itself, and that the modern world is really throwing a lot at us. So our ability to heal has become more challenging. And just in this short conversation, I think people are probably getting a bigger idea of it's not as simple as you didn't eat the right meal, that there's a lot more going on. But what about energetic blocks? I saw you talk a little bit about that, and I've been trying to wrap my head around frequency a little bit more. I definitely come from more of a science-based camp, but I also come from the body heals itself, and a lot of the things that we used to not be able to explain with science, we can now explain. And I think that energy frequency is one of those. So talk a little bit about where frequency and energy gets blocked in the body, and are there things we can do to unblock those energies?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a, topic I'm really passionate about and feel very much a student, and a continual learner. And my patients teach me, every day. And, I think always when I like to talk about this, I like to just remind people that even though these seem like maybe esoteric principles, they're actually, grounded in science.
Yep.
Conventional medicine very much acknowledges that we have electromagnetic fields in the body. So we have our heart produces the strongest electromagnetic field in the body. And so we have a field that is measurable about 6 feet, from our bodies that our heart produces, that conventional technology, reads and evaluates the heart. Our friends at Heart Math, Dr. Roland McCready has studied a lot about the heart and the field of the heart and the impact of the heart on our physiology.
Yep.
And it's very beautiful. I mean, it's so simple, but when we're in these states of gratitude, love, appreciation, our heartbeat, our heart rhythm becomes more coherent, more aligned. And that has a profound effect on our communication in our body. And we can measure that. And the heart actually informs the brain. The field of the heart that's generated informs the brain waves. And so when we want to create, healthy emotions and a healthy brain, we can really spend a few moments in gratitude. So we know we have electromagnetic fields of energy and information that we produce, and kind of bring it to like on a cellular level. We know about electrolytes, right? So sodium, potassium, all these, minerals that are really important for us. And they're important because they're electric lights. They're basically helping with electrical movement of energy in the body. And whenever we have electrical charged particles moving through conductors, we generate a magnetic field. And then on the other side, when we have a magnetic field, so collagen produces a magnetic field because it's a, three stranded structure. It's a helical structure. It produces an electric field. So why I just share that is like all of a sudden, okay, now you have this visual, aside from the esoteric stuff. Okay, we have this field of energy that our heart is producing. We have brain waves, and then we have all this charged matter moving in our body, creating all of these, fields. And so I really feel that this is the future of medicine, acknowledging this part of our physiology, because this is also where things can happen faster. So biochemistry is brilliant, and functional medicine and naturopathic medicine, I love it, but it can take time. And, what we're learning too through kind of this frontier science is that the biochemistry might actually be coming downstream. It's actually the organization of coherent fields of electrical and magnetic information that organize or draw things to each other, rather than this just lock and key model. There's a force that's
Right.
guiding it all. So it's amazing. And then when we think about energy, we have to think about light, because light is a form of energy. So we also know that our cells communicate with biophotons. So essentially the smallest packet of light. So when we are healthy, we have what we call coherent biophoton emissions in the cell. And when we're unhealthy, or when we're sick, or we have a cancer cell, there's incoherent basically photons of energy. And then that disrupts the trickle effect of that is that our cells don't work. We don't make energy, things break down, cellular communication. So when we think about, okay, all of this, and, then, we can talk about, chakras and meridians and subtle energy. I mean, there's a place for that, but just even staying on the topics I've talked about, we can have these areas of electrical disturbance in the body, right? We can have, areas of, blockages that affect basically these highways of these fields of energy and information. And I think scars do that, so when I think about scars, these
Back
are
at the
basically,
scars.
they basically circuiting our fascia and these,
Yeah.
the electrical flow. So I think about, definitely from that camp. And then, there is, when I think about energetic blockages too, I think about scars, I think about emotional trauma stuck in our tissues. And then I very much acknowledge that we have this biofield. So we have, okay, it's electromagnetic energy, and then there's all sorts of other conversations, but I do believe that this field can actually hold information around our bodies. And when we've been through life experiences, traumatic events, we can actually hold these memories not only in our tissue, but in our field. And there's a woman named Eileen McCusick, if anyone wants to go down the rabbit hole and really try to understand what I'm saying.
Say her name again.
Eileen McCusick. She
Eileen McCusick, yeah.
created, so you should have her on her podcast. And she's really,
Yeah.
and she created a system called biofield tuning. So she uses sound and vibration
Okay.
to help move energetic blockages out of the field. And so, what her work has shown is that we can have disturbances in the field, and that it's kind of like you have like a black cloud in your field. That's just this kind of thing that's basically disturbing the information and energy that's, coming to our physical body. And so, so there's so many ways to look at this issue, but I kind of just break it down to when I think about energetic principles, I think about coherence, and I think about coherent electromagnetic fields of information of energy. I think about coherent light. There's a whole world of sound, and how sound can actually, not only that our cells communicate with sound, which is pretty fascinating. There's this UCLA researcher that listened to cells, and healthy cells have this beautiful note, and then sick cells are screeching. So it's just this, whole other rabbit.
That's interesting. The cells give off a sound.
Yeah, it's called biophonons, so there's a whole there's biophotons and then biophonons. So there's just, I'm trying to share a lot of information to share, there's this whole other aspect to our physiology, and sound can be very healing too. I think sound can, we know that sound can have a huge effect on the body and the vagus nerve even, but we ultrasound, we use sound waves to measure, look at our body. And for anyone is listening, there's something called somatics. It's the study of how vibration affects matter, and they have these beautiful visuals that you can Google where they put different vibrational frequencies into basically looking at how it affects these kind of squares of sand, and they create these coherent patterns. So every frequency has an effect on matter in a different way.
Right.
And so it's just, I think it's a brilliant visual to how does frequency affect our body? And so I think it's an emerging science. There are a lot of tools in the biohacking world too that work with frequencies and how when we're out of balance, okay, how do we get back to balance? How do we restore kind of, coherent, aligned information so our cells can, sing better and emit light better and, all of these wonderful things. And so yeah, I think that light and sound and frequency, there's a huge opportunity to amplify our health and make all the functional medicine even shine brighter, incorporating and combining, all of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that I've been sort of wondering about healthcare in general is I feel like we're evolving into this really beautiful place, very much like, the pandemic was a breakdown for so many things. People started to see that they could work from home and they'd be just fine. And we started to look at slowing life down. I mean, there were so many things that initially I felt like were beautiful opportunities as humans to do life different. No doubt it got a little messy there in the middle of it. But what I see with healthcare is it's breaking apart. And there's something really beautiful and new that's emerging, and we don't know what that looks like yet. I have been in more conversations in the last month on sound healing and frequencies. I feel like I've stepped into a matrix from a lot of people saying this, and it makes perfect sense. And I know if you're hearing this for the first time, it sounds like woo woo. But if you actually break it down, you pick up your phone and you're able to talk to your friend who lives, on the other side of the world. And that is all done through frequency you cannot see.
Yeah.
So if you can't see that frequency, what frequency is happening to your body that's destroying your body? And what frequency can you put in that would be healing? So with that in mind, what are some of your, like, is it as simple as just putting on your favorite music? Like, how do we start to align our body up with the right frequencies?
Yeah, I love that. And I'm very much aligned with you. I have this kind of thought in my head, the future of medicine, I think, and whatever camp you're in, it's broken, right? So what is emerging through, and I think this is the matrix is knocking on your door, and you have to go, you go down this rabbit hole.
You're now in it.
I know, you're in it. You can't look back. You're going forward, and so, so when we talk about, this, there's so many things we can do, but like the basics, I think where we can start are, this is why grounding works, right? This is why getting in contact with the ground, Mother Earth, bare feet with the ground, where basically, the earth gives off electrons, and the electrons basically flow through our feet. And it's been studied, there's research on grounding and how it has all these effects on the body, and it helps with, inflammation and circulation and blood flow, and creating exclusion zone water in the body. And in that also extracellular matrix and these structural proteins, there's a protein called a proteoglycan, and they are what we call electron reservoirs, and they can be depleted as we, go through modern life. And so we got to kind of fill up our electron bucket. And so, essentially going out and being in nature can really be very supportive for
barefoot.
that. Yeah, barefoot. Yeah, you have to make contact, and then there are biohacks that, mimic grounding, that can mimic, like grounding pads, grounding sheets, these types of things can mimic that. And then, I'm all about like, okay, with light and sound, I think if we can, add in light, I mean, if you can just do the sun, that's great. I think we're still very much outside of the, not connected to the sun enough. And we know that the light from the sun affects our circadian biology and our hormones and, our health in so many ways. But, there are different tools and devices that you can have at home that can bring in different wavelengths of light. There's red light devices, infrared. I have friends who have a company called the Weber, which is, all of these other spectrums of light. So red and blue and green and yellow, and they all have a different impact on the body.
So cool.
And then sound, and again, when we think about it, we all can make sound, we might not be comfortable with that, but we can actually, that's where a lot of, I think, in ancient cultures, mantras and chanting and, all of that. So sound, you can play around with your own sound. And then if you want to be curious about sound, check out Eileen's work, Biofield Tuning. She sells a tuning fork that you can play around with. Our friend Kelly has a device called the Sound of Soul that I have.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it takes your heart rate variability.
Yeah, I have my own personal heart rate variability soundtrack. It's so flippin' cool.
Totally. So we take your heart rate variability, it converts it to sound and then plays it back to you. So you're basically auto-tuning your own field to be in its most coherent state. It's beautiful. I work with other devices that there's a device called the AO scan where you can actually speak into it and it picks up where you have too high or too low tones coming from your vocal cords. And it's wild, but they've done a lot of research on this, and they can correspond where you have missing tones to different subconscious thought patterns that you might be affected by, and then gives you the missing tones back. And so I like listen to that all day long, so when I'm typing on my computer, I, do that, for my own health. And so, sound baths, maybe your yoga studio or, somewhere in your community, I think sound baths can be really, really healing.
What's a sound bath?
A sound bath is often using, these Tibetan singing bowls that are these
Ah,
bowls that basically have a different frequency of sound that they emit.
mm,
And people who are trained to do this kind of know how to like dance with these bowls and
mm,
create this, like you're bathing in this frequency of sound. And my thought of what's happening in the body, I mean, it's deeply relaxing, but it's essentially giving more coherent sound waves to your field. And then I
mm,
also believe it's has an impact on structuring the water in your body. And so a
mm.
lot of people detox actually after being in the sound bath. They, have to drink more water, take
Crazy.
binders because like things are flowing. So there's a woman who I've gotten to know over the years, Nikki Gratrix. I think she called it sonic detox, like sound detox, because you just move so much energy in the body when you do that. So
Crazy.
so yeah, being curious, finding what resonates with you. I mean, there's so many paths to explore these things, but it's fun. I mean, it's fun and people feel good.
Yeah.
And it's, I think it's definitely worth exploring, especially if you're looking for some breakthroughs in your health or you've been stuck for a while. Bringing in these principles can, I think,
Yeah.
really create movement for you.
Yeah. One of the coolest things that experiences I've ever had was I had a yoga instructor that loved to bring live music
Oh yeah.
into our sessions. And one time she brought a guy in who was a master at the didgeridoo, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
And so when we were in downward dog, he came along with that didgeridoo and put it right at the base of like the sacrum, going to like L5 sacrum area, just beaming sound down your whole spine to your brain. And it thought, oh my gosh, I think I am in another reality right now. That was the most impressive thing I have felt in my brain and my body, perhaps in my whole life. And it was an ancient didgeridoo on my spine going into my nervous system that way was mind blowing.
I love that. And the
So
sound was basically traveling in the cerebral spinal fluid and
that's right.
creating,
Yeah.
more movement and flow and electrical energy. And you had that experience. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
cool. So cool. Well, let's finish up with this. And I think, for those of you guys that are listening, I just want to point out that what I love about this conversation is that we went in so many different directions to hopefully get you tools and Christine, I don't know, how you feel, but I have a sense that we're aligned on this, that we've got so many people stuck with their health and they're doing the same thing over and over again. They are another medication, then another medication, then another trip to a doctor, and then another doctor. And then maybe they step into the alternative world and they're like, well, let me try something more natural. But we're still coming at health from this one pill, one problem, one solution. And what I think you did for all of us listening today is really expand the thought that, gosh, there is so much more to our environment that we may not be addressing. And we really need to dive into the subtleties of everything that you talked about. That would be my summary of what just happened.
Thank you for allowing me to, traverse all of these topics in one conversation. I'm really grateful. And my heart comes from that place too, Mindy. And, our patients teach us. If I, didn't, of course, my heart believes in all of this. And I know this is truth from my own experience, but my patients teach me, right? And if gluten-free diet was enough, I wouldn't have gone down rabbit holes, So it comes from this, profound gratitude that my patients teach me.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, well, you said the magic word. This is season 3 of the Resetter podcast, and I decided to dedicate this whole season to gratitude. So give us an idea of what does your personal gratitude practice look like? Because a lot of people don't have a gratitude practice. And so I'm asking every guest, like, what does your practice look like so that we can all learn from it?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What a powerful word. So I've been down the Dr. Joe Dispenza rabbit hole in the last year, especially. And, I mentioned heart math, and then Dispenza, he also talks a lot about heart brain coherence. So my morning routine is that I wake up, I do the Peloton, And then I make time to meditate for, it used to be about 20 minutes, and now I'm stretching out to 45 minutes to 50 minutes. And
Yeah.
we start every meditation with opening our heart and connecting with that. And, it sounds so easy, but it's a process, right? And I have a 3.5-year-old daughter who,
Wow.
and my heart is outside my body, with that. And so it's very easy to, when I think about her, to
Yes.
get into that state. And so it's been fun for me to start kind of, she knows a lot now, but teaching her about her heart. But yeah, my morning routine is often, I'm not perfect, but I try to most days of the week, get into this space and this state of gratitude. And, if you don't have time for that, I also have a gratitude journal. So, if you just even, you have 5 minutes, just write down the things that you're grateful for, and really try to speak from that experience, that you can feel them, and they're not just kind of words, that you can really spend a moment to just sink in and feel them.
Yeah. What's the meditation? Is it a Joe Dispenza one? That
Yeah,
I'm
there's a
sure?
couple. Yeah, I have like a little library in my.
Yeah, which ones do you like? Because I end up down rabbit holes with his meditations, and then I'm like, I don't even know what he's saying. What am I focusing on?
And his experience, in all honesty, I think, there's so much you can do, of course, but when you're in, like, I've been to a couple retreats, and it all clicked when I was in his presence, because like, sometimes it's like, what is this guy saying? What's going on? But I like the tuning into new potentials, changing the boxes. I like the blessing of the energy centers. He has a morning and the evening, and the morning
Love
was
all
only
those.
like 25 minutes. And then he has a new series called Generating. And so it's only 15 minutes. So if you only have that, like, there's Generating Gratitude, there's one. So you just kind of like, stop, dropping, like, okay,
Stop, dropping, be grateful.
Get back to gratitude. Yeah.
I love that. Like, for the quick gratitude moment, or just sit your butt down and let's be grateful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, this was such a delightful conversation. And, I feel, if we go back to this idea around the matrix, when I met Kelly, she's like, oh my God, you got to know Christine. Like, she's in the matrix with us. She like understands all this stuff. But I do feel like there's this moment in not just life, but in healthcare, where we're really emerging out of an old paradigm. And yet it's very difficult to see what that new paradigm is going to look like. And when I have conversations like this with people like you, I get a little glimmer of where healthcare is going. And as obscure as it may sound, I just think it's so beautiful when we can come back to some ancient principles like sound, when we can look at light, when we can look at water, and we can see that there's a healing way to do all those things. And I loved this conversation. So thank you, Christine, for being here. How do people find you? Where's your work at, and where do people go stalk you?
Thank you, Mindy. And it's a pleasure as well to really connect with you in this space. And so I have a website, drchristineschaffner.com, and I have my podcast is there, and just information about my clinic, which is another website called immanencehealth.com. And that's in Seattle. And we do a lot of telemedicine as well. And I'm going to have you, Mindy, on my podcast. So I'd love to share your work with my community as well. Yeah, I love that. And I'm very much aligned with you. I have this kind of thought in my head, the future of medicine, I think, and whatever camp you're in, it's broken, right? So what is emerging through, and I think this is the matrix is knocking on your door. I mean, you have to go down this rabbit hole.
You're now in it. We're
I know, you're in it. You can't go back.